Conservation Mismatch by HannahWallace. So an overview, we're going to talk about some endemic species, the priority of conservation, and the locations that we should conserve. To start, we're looking at an article by Jenkins about land mismatch and biodiversity priorities. He first states that species that need the most protection are not correlated with species with the protected land. He references a priority index that you can see on the right, where biodiverse hotspots are, and that we need to prioritize these hotspots. He also states that our protected areas are based on the usefulness of humans. The rebuttal to that is by Brown. He talks about having the protection of biodiverse hotspots has a lot of problems because he's not sure if the areas that we protect would have any real outcome. He talks about the priority of species and location and whether those protecting those areas are actions to divert species decline. He also talks about varying factors. He says that there are economic, political, and social restraints to areas that have high biodiversity and a potential for conservation. And lastly, he talks about species variety. He states that complementary species and the importance of variety of species can help conservation. Jenkins then responds to Brown and says that there's a convenience factor. He says that we need to recognize the responsibility we have to protect biodiverse hotspots, regardless of the services they provide to humans. He also says that there needs to be a prioritization of species with smaller niche sizes in comparison to those with larger, and that this change of conservation will happen from local regions that can result in overall change. From there, that leads us into the research questions. The first question is there a conservation mismatch between biodiverse hotspots and protected lands? If there is a mismatch, do these protected lands coincide with areas of high slope? First, we looked at the protected public lands that you can see in the green, and we then found the density of the protected lands. As you can see in the red, that's where there are high areas of density in protected lands. By using information from Jenkins, we then look at biodiverse hotspots. We start with mammal biodiversity, tree biodiversity, amphibian biodiversity, and then bird biodiversity. We combine all of these to create biodiverse hotspots. You can see that this is located in the southeastern United States, the red showing the highest biodiversity and the blue showing the least. From there, we can match up the protected public lands as well as the biodiversity hotspots. You can see in the green that the biodiversity hotspots do not match much with where there is high biodiversity. We can still see that it is located in the Rocky Mountain regions, which is shown to have low biodiversity. Since we realize that there's not a correlation between biodiversity hotspots and protected lands, we then move to protected public lands, potentially coinciding with slope. You can see that the darker brown shows areas with higher slope, whereas the lighter brown shows areas with lower slope. Then to stack those two maps together, we can look at the public protected lands as well as slope, and you can see that areas with higher slope are correlated to protected public lands. We then look at the 6 common mistakes in conservation by game. He lists 6 common mistakes, and a few of these mistakes are conservation decisions. He states that conservation planners are not making the correct decisions when it comes to conservation. He also talks about how complex and undefined these problems really are when it comes to conservation, as well as us not being able to prioritize action. He also talks about classification of species like endangered, highly endangered, and that these classifications are arbitrary. He then talks about how we are not transparent, and lastly, he talks about our failure. He states that not every conservation action will turn out successfully, and that there are many unknown relationships between species and unknown impacts. Lastly, he quotes that we need information and tools to ensure that prioritization deliver objective, defensible, and ultimately efficient conservation decisions. Back to our research question, is there a conservation mismatch? Our data shows that there is a mismatch between biodiversity hotspots and protected lands. Areas that are protected have a higher slope, provide minimal services to humans, but these areas that we are conserving are beautiful lands geographically, and species that are protected there are important. Overall, I conclude that I think we need conservation more broadly and shouldn't discredit the areas that we are currently conserving. My works cited as well as my data slide. Thank you very much and have a great day.